Hello, my name is LaRonda Savoy. I'm a behavior science major. I'm completing this assignment for Sociology 304. The assignment consists of three questions that I have to answer. The first question is: compare and contrast Jim Crow laws of the southern United States with Africa's apartheid. Jim Crow laws started between the year 1877 and ended in 1960. The southern states started these laws to keep former slaves and their descendants as subordinate. The laws used were called the Jim Crow laws. These laws consisted of segregation in public facilities such as schools, the army, and railroad cars. Whites had more rights than blacks, and blacks were treated like they were the underprivileged. The situation when Africa's apartheid was the most dramatic government engineered segregation in South Africa. In 1948, Great Britain granted South Africa its independence, and the National Party consisted of the white minority that consumed control over the government. To deal with the multiracial population, the whites devised a policy called apartheid. That's where the name comes from. To ensure dominance, they placed blacks in rural areas and urban areas, and their mobility was limited. Looking at both groups, the Southerners in the United States during the Jim Crow laws and the Africans that was dealing with the apartheid in South Africa, both groups were treated less than and not as equals. The difference I can see would be Americans' mobility was not regulated. They were free to go about and do what they wanted to do. But if they got out of hand and disrespected one of these Jim Crow laws, it was a such thing as lynching. And lynching was hanging a black man from a tree until he died. So both groups suffered and had similar circumstances, but the difference was, and I will reiterate, was the Southerners, the African American Southerners, were free to go where they wanted to go, but they just had to adhere to the Jim Crow laws. My second question had to do with ageism. The question is: what is unique about the elderly as compared to other minority groups? Do you think that ageism is taken as seriously as prejudice and discrimination towards other groups? And I have to explain. There is one crucial difference between older people and other subordinate groups, such as racial and ethnic minorities or women. All of us at some point in life will eventually grow to be old and become the elderly. Ageism is not taken as seriously as prejudice and discrimination towards other groups. And I feel that way because in certain situations, we're not aware when we're prejudiced or discriminating against the elderly. For instance, if you go to the Walmart and you have a cashier who's 70 years old versus a cashier who's 20 years old, and you're in a hurry, you just had a long day at work, I would think the majority will lean towards the 20-something-year-old cashier, feeling that the cashier will get them in and out. The service will be quick. Just in that split second, you discriminated against an elderly person without even knowing it. So I think a lot of us do it without knowing that we're doing it. So it's not direct prejudice or discrimination. It's kind of indirect and subtle, but they do get discriminated against, but I don't think it's on purpose. So I wouldn't say it's as bad as minority groups who people purposely discriminate against and are prejudiced against. My third question: provide an overview of the history of the disability rights movement, including where it originated, goals of the movement, and the different organizations involved in addressing disability in the U.S. history. In the early 1960s, a gentleman by the name of Ed Roberts and other young adults with disabilities enrolled in the University of California at Berkeley. They were met with hesitation, but eventually they were able to enroll into the school. They were given their own living quarters at the university, and they established their own student center. It was called the Rolling Quads. They eventually established Berkeley Center for Independent Living, and this independent living became the standard and model for hundreds of independent living centers. Organizations that are affiliated with the Disability Act are the National Federation of the Blind and New York City's Disabled in Action. And the ADA, which is America's Disability Act, it prohibits bias in employment, transportation, public accommodation, and telecommunication against people with disabilities. Businesses with more than 15 employees cannot refuse to hire a qualified applicant with a disability. These companies are expected and must make accommodations for persons with disabilities. The goals of the American Disability Act is to take a civil rights view of disabilities. They seek to humanize the way society sees and treats people with disabilities. All people should be treated equally, and those with disabilities, that's no exception to the rule. Again, my name is LaRonda Savoy. Thank you.